Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
If you are experiencing that palpable sense that technological evolution is moving at a speed, government, law, and even, well, human comprehension just can't seem to match, you are definitely feeling the core challenge of our digital era.
It's overwhelming, isn't it? The sheer volume of data being generated is astronomical.
And AI's capacity for pattern recognition is just monumental. It's reshaping everything, politics, economics, and maybe most fundamentally, what it even means to exercise human agency.
Today, though, we want to go beyond just observing this rapid transformation. We're aiming to unpack the strategic blueprint for a framework designed to actually manage it. Algorithmic Justice AI, or AJA.
Right.
So our mission for this deep dive, using this really comprehensive set of sources, is to understand how we can consciously redirect AI's immense power, its incredible ability to find and optimize patterns away from just amplifying historical injustice, which it seems prone to do.
And steer it towards consciously optimizing for systemic justice instead.
Exactly. That's the goal.
Okay, let's dig into this blueprint immediately, because the sources identify a pretty fundamental flaw right at the heart of the current approach. The core problem isn't just that AI makes mistakes, like simple errors.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It's that AI relies overwhelmingly on historical records. And those records, well, by definition, they inherently encode systemic inequalities from the past. The source actually calls this the core problem, the amplification of historical bias and possessiveness, often showing up as what it terms proxy bias.
Yeah, that phrase proxy bias, that's really the key insight here, I think. If an algorithm is designed, let's say, to predict loan default risk, it might explicitly exclude variables like race or gender to comply with legal fairness mandates. That sounds good on paper.
Seems fair, yeah.
But it will then leverage proxies, things like neighborhood zip codes, maybe the school someone attended, or certain credit history metrics that are themselves historical artifacts of systemic inequality.
So it finds other ways to get at the same biased information.
Precisely. The algorithm, in its relentless quest for perfect efficiency, learns that maybe a zip code is a surprisingly good proxy for the outcome it's trying to predict. And so it efficiently reproduces the historical bias of the lending system, just using a different label.
So it's being perfectly efficient at being perfectly unfair, but it's hidden under all these layers of statistical complexity.
Exactly. And that's why AJA, this framework, has to go far beyond simple technical metrics like algorithmic fairness, which might just mean ensuring, parity in statistical error rates across different demographic groups.
That's not enough.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
AJA demands that we adopt the much more rigorous lens of social justice to scrutinize the continuous use of these algorithmic tools. We have to look at the actual outcomes in the real world, not just the math inside the box.
And this brings us to one of the, I thought, most intellectually compelling phrases in the sources. Algorithms aren't seen as just static pieces of code. They're described as socio-technical ontologies. It suggests they are sort of living, evolving entities tied directly to human systems.
That concept is absolutely vital for understanding how AJA must function. It really gets to the heart of it. It means the algorithm is perpetually shaped by its ongoing interaction with legal frameworks, socio-political systems, the data it consumes. Everything.
It's not separate from society.
Not at all. Think about a self-driving vehicle algorithm. When a city passes a new ordinance, maybe prioritizing cyclists in certain lanes, the vehicle's ethics module, its decision-making core, has to adapt. Its behavior on the road immediately changes.
Ah, okay.
The technology and the legal framework co-evolve, you see. So if the political environment itself is unjust, the algorithm adapts to efficiently thrive within and, frankly, enforce that injustice.
Yeah.
AJA recognizes that the challenge isn't just technical debugging, it's systemic redesign.
Right. You can't just fix the code. You have to fix the context it operates in.
That's the core idea.
Okay, so that distinction between technical fixes and systemic change brings us directly to this major institutional flaw identified early in the blueprint: the pattern of systemic compliance over technical fairness. This feels like a powerful critique of how things often work now. What does it actually look like when a technically fair algorithm operates within an institutionally unjust system?
Well, it reveals a really profound structural misalignment, and it's happening right now, particularly in things like municipal governance. Let's use the example of a judicial risk assessment tool. The engineers might bend over backward, technically, to ensure the algorithm achieves statistical parity.
Meaning
Meaning the prediction error rate for recidivism, say, is statistically equal across all demographic groups they measure. Technically, on paper, it looks fair.
Okay.
But if that algorithm is deployed within a criminal justice system that has historically focused surveillance and arrests disproportionately on marginalized communities,
Then the input data itself is already skewed, isn't it?
precisely, the institution itself is rooted in inequity. So the algorithm is then deployed, often with the goal of increasing the system's overall efficiency. It optimizes for the system it finds, not the system we might wish existed.
So it learns the existing biases.
It learns them perfectly.
Yeah.
It identifies historical patterns of arrests and subsequent criminal charges. And since those historical patterns are already inequitable due to, say, decades of targeted policing, the efficient algorithm simply complies with that inequitable institutional framework. It might recommend higher bail or longer sentences for members of those communities because the data says doing so is the most efficient path to managing recidivism as historically defined by that biased system.
Wow. So the algorithm doesn't fix the injustice. It actually makes the existing unfairness faster, more scalable, and maybe even more deeply entrenched because it lends this sort of veneer of mathematical objectivity to a biased system.
That's exactly the danger.
So the conclusion then has to be that true justice requires fundamental institutional transformation alongside any technical refinement. You can't just tweak the algorithm.
Correct. You absolutely must reform the governance model, the policy objectives, the systemic allocation of resources before you let the algorithm loose, or it will simply optimize the status quo, biases and all.
And this leads directly then to the issue of time, doesn't it? What the sources call the speed mismatch or the pattern acceleration disparity. It feels like we're watching a race where policy is almost guaranteed to lose.
This speed disparity is arguably the single greatest driver of future inequity. It's a huge problem. On one side, you have pattern acceleration, the exponential speed at which AI recognizes, calculates, and exploits economic, social, and even biological patterns.
Like high-frequency trading.
Exactly. Patterns identified and exploited in milliseconds. On the other side, we have regulatory velocity, the, let's be honest, glacial speed of legislative policy reform, public consultation, legal challenges, establishment.
AI runs at light speed, and regulatory bodies move at the speed of bureaucracy. It's not even close.
It's not. And the implication of this mismatch is massive, and we see it playing out constantly in the tech world. This disparity guarantees that the concentration of wealth, data, and systemic control, which the sources use the term algorithmic possessiveness for, occurs well before we can establish comprehensive ethical and legal guardrails.
So the power gets locked in early.
Right. By the time Congress or Parliament or whoever manages to draft effective legislation, the winners have already accumulated monopoly power, they've entrenched their control over core infrastructure, and they've locked down the most valuable data sets.
The power dynamics are fully entrenched before the regulators even kind of get to the starting line.
Yeah, the race is already over in some respects.
So AJA must mandate that policy can't be static. It has to become as dynamic as the technology it seeks to govern. It needs to be capable of responding to emergent patterns almost in near real time. That's a huge ask for governance.
It's a massive shift in how we think about regulation. Yeah. And underpinning all of this pattern acceleration is, let's face it, the simple economic driver, the resource optimization pattern. AI development is enormously expensive.
Huge compute power, specialized talent, massive data sets.
Exactly. And those resources come with an expectation of return on investment.
Naturally.
Absolutely. So the technological imperative is tied directly to maximizing ROI for the system owners, especially since data is widely treated as the new oil, the primary commodity.
Right.
This inherent desire for resource optimization inevitably translates into the centralization of wealth and systemic control for those who own the infrastructure and the models.
Yeah.
Algorithmic possessiveness isn't some accidental side effect. It's the direct consequence of this optimization pattern driven by financial returns.
So AJA needs to push back against that directly.
Explicitly. AJA must explicitly identify and counteract this inherent economic pattern. It has to mandate that optimization aligns with community purpose and systemic equity, not solely with private profit maximization. That's a fundamental reorientation.
Okay, now let's move into the technical how. How does AI actually achieve this kind of calculative control? The blueprint details several sophisticated architectural designs. Let's start with sequential orchestration. This sounds like a structured workflow, but potentially a fragile one.
That's a good way to put it. It is essentially the automation of complex, multi-stage dependent decision-making processes.
Yeah.
Think of a major legal case management system, maybe, or a complex manufacturing supply chain.
Okay.
The output of the initial stage, say, compiling discovery documents in the legal example, refines the process and becomes the direct input for the next stage, perhaps prioritizing deposition schedules based on those documents. This structure allows for incredible efficiency when it works.
But the dependency is the risk, right? What happens when the system fails sequentially?
Well, the source notes the significant risk of catastrophic sequential failure if low quality or biased output corrupts the workflow early on. Imagine a complex medical diagnostic system using sequential orchestration. Stage 1 identifies potential biomarkers from scans. Stage 2 cross-references patient history and genetic data. Stage 3 suggests a treatment plan based on the first 2 stages. Now, if Stage 1 uses incomplete or biased data, perhaps it misses genetic markers common in a specific demographic group because the training data was poor.
Then that error feeds forward.
Exactly. That initial low-quality input is then used by the subsequent stages, leading to a perfectly calculated but entirely wrong diagnosis and treatment plan. The entire workflow breaks down because of that initial flawed pattern recognition.
Yeah, that makes the whole system very brittle, doesn't it? Beyond these rigid sequential steps, we also have mechanisms leveraging continuous learning, like adaptive learning and anomaly detection.
Right. This is where the AI starts to mirror human cognitive flexibility a bit more. These systems often leverage reinforcement learning, or RL, to continuously monitor data streams and adapt their understanding.
Like dynamic monitoring.
Yep. Exactly. Dynamic monitoring devices, used perhaps in personal health or critical infrastructure, collect vast amounts of activity data. They learn what constitutes normal or baseline behavior for that specific individual or system, and then they can instantaneously detect deviations from that norm.
Give me an example.
Sure. In fraud detection, a good system learns your specific purchasing patterns, where you shop, how much you spend, time of day. Then it flags unusual transactions immediately, not based on some global average, but based on deviations from your established pattern. It's personalized anomaly detection.
Okay, that makes sense. And then there's the ultimate breakthrough mechanism mentioned, universal pattern discovery. This is where AI supposedly breaks free from very specific data sets to create generalized world models directly from observations. This sounds almost like science fiction.
It does edge towards that, but it's transforming scientific inquiry already. Instead of scientists building a model to look for, say, a specific type of star they've hypothesized, AI is applied to vast observational data in fields like astrophysics. And it classifies celestial sources by recognizing entirely new, generalized patterns about energy, matter, motion patterns humans hadn't even hypothesized or looked for. It moves from modeling a specific narrow system to modeling the underlying reality itself, which allows for potentially massive knowledge transfer between previously disconnected domains.
Whoa, okay. Now let's tackle what feels like the central challenge for public trust and accountability, the explainability imperative, XAI. Transparency is increasingly mandated as a procedural right, especially in systems affecting people's lives, but we immediately run into this technical wall, don't we?
We absolutely do. And that wall is what the sources call the XAI fidelity gap. This is a really critical distinction to grasp. A model's interpretability, its internal knowledge structure, the sort of mathematical logic under the hood.
The raw code and weights.
Yeah, essentially. That does not automatically translate into explainability. The ability for a regular citizen or a regulator or an auditor to actually comprehend the underlying causal logic in human terms. We can maybe see the wires, but we can't understand the circuit board's design or why it produced a specific output.
And if the logic of why the AI made a decision is opaque, is a black box,
Then trust dissolves instantly and accountability becomes impossible. How can you challenge a decision you don't understand?
and the problem gets even worse because of the XAI fidelity trade-off pattern. This sounds like a fundamental conflict in the design process itself.
It absolutely is. High-stakes applications, things like judicial risk assessment, complex financial modeling, advanced medical diagnostics, they demand extremely high accuracy. You want the best possible prediction.
Of course.
But high accuracy usually requires deep, complex, nonlinear models, like the deep neural networks we hear about. And that high complexity inherently destroys transparency. It makes it almost impossible to truly audit or explain the decision pathway in simple terms. You generally cannot have perfect accuracy and perfect simplicity simultaneously. It's a fundamental design constraint.
So if a super complex neural network can achieve, say, 98% accuracy in diagnosing a rare cancer, but literally no human can trace its logic, versus a simpler, understandable model achieving maybe 96% accuracy with full traceability, what does AJA require us to do?
AGA requires proactive intervention here. It says we must calculate and enforce ethical thresholds. There has to be a point where the existential or systemic risk of a completely unexplained decision outweighs the marginal accuracy gains provided by an opaque, complex model.
So we might have to sacrifice a little bit of accuracy for accountability.
In certain high-stakes contexts, yes. AJA argues we must be willing to sacrifice that, say, 2% marginal optimization gain to ensure decisions are understandable, challengeable, and accountable, especially when the decision affects someone's life, their liberty, or access to core public resources.
And the explanation itself can't be one size fits all, right? You can't just dump a massive technical log file on a citizen who was denied a loan.
Absolutely not. That's useless. Explanations need to be localized and carefully tailored to the stakeholder. A citizen who was denied a service needs a simple, clear causal path leading to that specific adverse decision. They need to know which data points about them influence their outcome and why.
But an auditor might need more.
Right. An external regulator or an auditor, however, probably needs the full trace-level data transformation pipeline to check for systemic issues or compliance failures. This distinction requires specialized tools to deliver the right level of explanation to the right person.
And the sources mention one specific tool concept, the localized causal map, LCM. Can you define that a bit more clearly? What would that look like?
Yeah, think of the LCM as a kind of visual interface powered by XAI techniques. It's specifically designed to spatially localize or pinpoint the biased features or key influencing factors within the data that led to a particular outcome.
So it shows you where the decision came from.
Exactly. For example, if a model downgrades your credit score, the LCM doesn't just show you the final low score. It visually maps which specific inputs, maybe historical late payments in one specific category, or perhaps a heavy reliance on proxy data like your zip code, contributed disproportionately to your score being lowered. It aims to turn abstract mathematics into an intuitive, visual explanation of where the bias or the primary cause originated, making it accessible even to non-technical users.
Okay, that sounds potentially very useful. So just to quickly summarize the kinds of patterns AI recognizes that AJA needs to manage,
Yeah.
we have deviation anomaly patterns for things like monitoring and fraud detection.
Right.
We have causal inference patterns. Why is that one so important?
Causal inference is absolutely crucial for justice because it attempts to move beyond mere correlation. It tries to establish verifiable cause and effect relationships. This is essential for things like bias identification and hiring algorithms. Did the algorithm merely correlate gender with historical salary data, or did it causally infer a lower competency based on gender proxies?
Big
A
difference.
huge difference. It's also vital for root cause analysis of systemic failures, maybe in public health outcomes or educational disparities. Why is this happening?
Got it. And finally, cognitive bias patterns. This is fascinating. The AI looking inward, predicting inherent human flaws in irrationality.
Yes. This leverages really advanced models, like the mention in the sources of something called Centaur, which was apparently trained on immense behavioral data sets, including the equivalent of a Psychology 101 curriculum's worth of known biases.
Wow.
By simulating generalized human behavior, AI can potentially preemptively identify patterns where our own known cognitive biases, like confirmation bias, availability heuristics, or just simple irrational choices, are likely to lead us or systems astray.
Yeah. And how could that be used?
Well, the potential applications mentioned include things like market manipulation prediction spotting, where herd behavior might create bubbles, or perhaps guiding complex negotiated conflict resolution by anticipating where biases might derail talks. The idea is that AJA could intervene against injustice driven not just by biased data, but by predictable human irrationality itself.
Okay, now let's pivot to the really profound implications of these patterns for the individual listener, for us as humans. Starting with this idea called the AI ethical resonance hypothesis, the notion that AI systems act as a kind of cognitive mirror, reflecting our own values and, crucially, our biases.
It is profoundly unsettling, isn't it? Because it basically means the AI is only as good, or perhaps more worryingly, as bad as the data we feed it and the values we implicitly embed in its design and goals.
It learns from us, warts and all.
Exactly. And because models trained on human behavioral patterns, like that Centaur example, can simulate and predict generalized human behavior, they potentially grant AJA the power to preemptively identify patterns of potential societal harm before we, as a collective, even fully realize the injustice we are propagating.
So we're using the pattern recognition engine to diagnose our own societal flaws.
In a way, yes, that's one potential positive application.
But this mirror doesn't just show us our biases. The sources warn it actively amplifies them, especially when it comes to social success or desirability.
That's the critical downside. And it's a major concern when pattern recognition is applied uncritically to social domains. Things like, say, housing allocation algorithms, or even algorithmic matchmaking platforms.
Matchmaking, how does that work?
Well, if the AI recognizes and then optimizes based on existing social hierarchies or perceived desirability metrics, whatever those might be, based on the data, then those hierarchies become immediately reinforced and potentially more rigid.
It learns what's popular and promotes that.
Essentially. And some studies referenced, unfortunately, have shown that this process can leave individuals deemed least desirable by the algorithm's metrics objectively worse off than they were before the technology was even introduced. The tech doesn't just reflect inequality, it actively entrenches and increases it in areas like social connection, making upward mobility, or even just finding partners harder for some.
That's quite bleak. Moving to the highly sensitive area of health and biology, we have the incredible promise of predictive genomics, AI analyzing vast genetic data sets to recognize individual disease risks, cancer, diabetes, potentially enabling a personalized medicine on a scale we've never imagined.
Immense life-saving potential, absolutely. But it immediately raises the specter of the pattern of health disparity amplification. This is a serious ethical challenge.
How so?
If access to this highly personalized, potentially life-saving predictive medicine, which could significantly extend lifespan and improve quality of life, correlate strongly with socioeconomic factors, things like wealth, geography, or even the quality of someone's existing foundational health care.
Then the rich get healthier and live longer, and the poor don't.
That's the fear. Existing disparities won't just continue, they'll be amplified, potentially dramatically. We could see technology influencing lifespan and overall biological fitness across the population in ways that track existing inequalities.
We're talking about a potential technological stratification of biological outcomes based on wealth and access. So AJA must intervene in those resource distribution patterns.
Absolutely. The AJA framework explicitly mandates active intervention to ensure equitable distribution of access to these powerful health technologies. Otherwise, we risk using AI to unintentionally create a kind of medically optimized elite, widening the health gap enormously.
Education seems to face a very similar dilemma. AI, using reinforcement learning, can dynamically tailor curricula and potentially maximize learning efficiency for every single student. Sounds amazing.
Again, it would be amazing if access were perfectly equal. But in reality, we observe what the sources call the educational proxy pattern. Existing wealth disparities directly influence who gets access to the most advanced AI-enabled personalized learning systems.
So better tech for richer schools or families.
Pretty much. These advanced systems function as powerful competitive advantages. This reinforces the systemic advantages already held by wealthy groups, whose children are far more likely to benefit from individualized adaptive curricula optimized by AI.
And the sources suggest the long-term consequence of this pattern is truly unsettling, potentially going beyond just academic advantage.
Yes, the concern is that it creates a growing cognitive and resource gap that could translate into weak but persistent selective pressures at the population level. Over generations, this could favor those with greater technological and personalized educational access. We are potentially talking about generations of compounded advantage baked in by technology access.
Wow. This inherent friction between perfect efficiency and, well, human well-being leads us to what might be the most existential concept in the whole blueprint, the optimal deviation pattern.
This concept really grapples with the philosophical question of human purpose and meaning. If AI achieves perfect choice prediction, flawless optimization of resource allocation, and proactively prevents all disease and error, what does that leave for us?
It sounds like it removes friction from life.
Exactly. But struggle, making mistakes, self-directed exploration, curiosity, overcoming challenges, aren't these fundamental to human purpose, agency, and growth? Unchecked, the relentless drive for perfect efficiency risks trampling the human spirit by eliminating the necessary space for that self-directed struggle and growth.
So the recommendation is pretty radical.
Yeah.
AJA must calculate and potentially suggest a controlled, deliberate inefficiency. It sounds counterintuitive.
It does, but the logic is profound. AJA might need to identify and incorporate a measured, calculated inefficiency, or perhaps a designed element of risk built into personalized guidance systems. The goal is to preserve that necessary space for autonomous decision-making, for learning from mistakes, for character development.
So pattern recognition tells us when optimization itself becomes harmful to human development.
Precisely. It might mandate a pause or suggest a less efficient path specifically to protect agency.
And if we fail to manage this delicate balance, the sources warn about the long-term threat, the almost unimaginable consequence of differential AI augmentation.
This links explicitly back to that algorithmic possessiveness we discussed earlier, the concentration of power. Differential access to AI, whether it's advanced cognitive tools, educational enhancement systems, or personalized predictive genomics, if that access remains strongly tied to socioeconomic status.
It could lead to divergence.
It could lead to diverging human subpopulations over the long term. We are talking about the possibility of segregated cognitive and biological advantages developing over time, based purely on access to augmentation technologies.
That's a monumental thought.
It is. And AJ's scope, therefore, must extend to actively managing this technological inequality. The aim is to prevent what could become an involuntary foundational shift in human evolution, potentially dividing humanity into technologically augmented and unaugmented groups based on wealth and power.
Okay, let's move now to the macro-level impact, looking at systems of governance. The blueprint points out pretty starkly that judicial systems are immediately compromised by biased AI. Tools like Compass, which are already used in the U.S. to inform bail and sentencing decisions, rely entirely on historical data.
Which, as we've established, inherently introduces proxy bias.
And that perpetuates unfairness at a massive scale.
Right. Absolutely. And predictive policing systems in law enforcement operate under pretty much the same flawed principle. While they might be technically effective at identifying historical crime patterns based on past bias policing.
Their application is never neutral.
Never. Predictive policing invariably reflects the political, cultural, and legal norms of the governing country or jurisdiction. The AI becomes a tool reflecting the state's intent, whatever that may be.
And we see really stark global contrasts here, don't we? The sources mention public backlash in places like the UK and the Netherlands over concerns about racial profiling and a lack of transparency in these tools.
Yes, leading to serious public questioning of the legitimacy and fairness of deploying these systems in the first place. There's a demand for accountability.
But then you look at authoritarian states like China, particularly in regions like Xinjiang.
And the picture is completely different. There, extensive surveillance and predictive policing are used explicitly not to enhance equity or even just manage crime efficiently in a neutral sense, but to enforce population control and state-sanctioned oppression. The system works perfectly, in that context, to remove human autonomy and enforce political compliance. It's the same pattern recognition technology, used for vastly different ends.
This sharp contrast really brings up a major crisis in accountability everywhere, the pattern of accountability and ownership.
This is a huge practical failure point, particularly in Western democracies. Many predictive policing systems, or government risk assessment tools used for benefits or services, are actually proprietary products. They're developed and owned by private companies, not public institutions.
They operate as black boxes, though.
Effectively, yes. This proprietary control creates systemic accountability failures. It makes it incredibly difficult, sometimes impossible, for citizens or even government oversight bodies to exercise their procedural right to a clear explanation or conduct independent oversight. If the core algorithm is a trade secret,
the government itself can't fully audit or explain its decisions.
Often, no. And accountability gets diffused or simply vanishes into corporate secrecy.
Economically, we've touched on this, but the blueprint highlights the acceleration of structural unemployment via the skill obsolescence pattern. AI is poised to replace numerous jobs requiring routine cognitive labor,
which inevitably accelerates wealth inequality, concentrating gains towards the owners of the AI infrastructure and capital.
And AJA must proactively address this.
Yes, the framework recognizes the need to suggest entirely new economic structures and human-centric roles focused on judgment, ethics, oversight, things we'll detail a bit later. But even within core government services themselves, relying on these complex, often proprietary systems creates a significant physical vulnerability. The systemic fragility pattern.
Okay, give us a specific example of that systemic fragility risk. What could actually happen?
Well, imagine a major municipal government that decides to shift most of its core operations, managing the utility grid, optimizing traffic control, allocating emergency services like ambulances and fire trucks onto a single, complex, sequentially orchestrated automated decision system, maybe provided by one big private vendor.
Sounds efficient, potentially.
Potentially. But now imagine a single injected bias or a catastrophic error in that foundational optimization layer. Perhaps it's a sophisticated zero-day cyber attack, or maybe just a simple but critical coding mistake made months ago that only manifests under specific conditions.
What's the consequence?
The consequence could be cascading failures across all those interdependent public services simultaneously. You could see blackouts spreading, healthcare systems getting incorrect dispatch information, law enforcement deployment failing catastrophically, all because one core, possibly proprietary algorithm was optimized incorrectly or maliciously attacked.
That's a truly catastrophic scenario for a city or region.
It really is.
Yeah.
And mitigating that requires AJA to mandate extreme transparency, robust human oversight integrated at every critical systemic transition point, and fully independent regular auditing of the entire automated infrastructure. No black boxes allowed for critical public services.
This systemic fragility is often obscured, isn't it, by a pervasive cultural assumption, something the blueprint labels the cultural pattern of justice as efficiency.
Yes, this is a really insidious belief. It's the dangerous idea that complex social, cultural, ethical, and moral issues can somehow be solved purely through mathematically principled efficiency. It's the technocratic fantasy that the answer to deep-seated social injustice is simply a better optimization equation.
Which AJA argues is fundamentally logically flawed.
Absolutely. AJA's primary job in many ways is to expose that logical flaw relentlessly. An algorithm that achieves, say, a 90% crime reduction rate, an extremely efficient outcome on paper, but does so by systematically targeting, surveilling, and harassing marginalized populations, is efficient, yes, but it is profoundly unjust.
It optimizes the wrong thing.
It has maximized one variable, crime reduction perhaps, while completely minimizing others, like equity, liberty, community trust. AJA requires a fundamentally new optimization goal: maximized equity per unit of efficiency. Measurable fairness metrics and systemic justice criteria must take clear precedence over simple predictive accuracy or resource minimization alone.
Okay, putting this whole challenge in a global context, the blueprint briefly summarizes key regulatory differences we see emerging. The EU seems to be focusing on strict data protection with GDPR and a strong human rights framework.
Which is laudable, but the critique often is that the inherent complexity of that kind of detailed regulation can sometimes hinder rapid innovation and deployment, creating its own challenges.
Meanwhile, the U.S. operates under more of a regulatory patchwork, relying heavily on historical data.
Which, as we've established repeatedly, leads to rampant proxy bias issues. The sources actually highlight that prediction accuracy in U.S. government AI systems is often highly variable and sometimes worryingly unreliable, ranging wildly from negligible predictive power, like 0.6% accuracy in some cases, up to 90% in others, depending heavily on the specific locality, the data source, the task. It's a dangerous sign of inconsistency and lack of standardization.
And then, as we noted earlier, authoritarian states like China are using extensive state surveillance, clearly prioritizing population control and social credit scoring over individual autonomy.
Leading directly to state-sanctioned trampling of human freedom and dignity, using AI as the tool of enforcement.
So, AJA needs to navigate this complex global landscape.
Yes, it needs to synthesize the best, most human-centric aspects of these different models, like the EU's strong rights focus, while actively building robust defenses against the state-sanctioned oppression we see enabled by AI in authoritarian contexts. The global contrast really proves that the application of AI isn't deterministic. It's ultimately a political and moral choice, reflecting the values we consciously embed in its design and deployment. #TAG-V, the cosmic scale and the co-evolutionary path.
All right, let's expand our scope now, maybe erratically. AJA's vision, according to these sources, isn't limited just to human interactions. It explicitly extends to our relationship with the planet itself. AI is seen as crucial for recognizing ecological deviation patterns, but it must actively counteract what's termed the unsustainable extraction pattern.
Right. That pattern is basically the purely economic optimization model we currently default to, the one that ruthlessly maximizes short-term financial gain over long-term planetary health and stability.
Like optimizing deforestation for timber profits or overfishing?
Exactly. AI, when driven purely by conventional financial metrics, will find the most efficient way to consume resources, regardless of the long-term consequences. AJA systems, therefore, must integrate ecological responsibility and long-term sustainability metrics as mandatory, non-negotiable optimization constraints. Planetary health becomes a hard limit, not an afterthought.
And on the grandest possible scale, The sources suggest AI provides potentially the highest level of understanding of reality itself through that universal pattern discovery we touched on earlier. We're talking about AI recognizing the high-level patterns governing energy, matter, the cosmos, essentially revealing the fundamental laws of existence.
This is where AJA arguably gains its ultimate existential mandate. By identifying these fundamental, immutable physical, ecological, and temporal constraints, what the blueprint calls the inescapable existential patterns, things like the true planetary carrying capacity, the absolute limits of atmospheric carbon absorption, the real cradle-to-grave resource costs of various economic models.
AI forces us to confront reality.
It fundamentally shifts the human perspective, or it should. Understanding these rigid, non-negotiable constraints renders petty, short-term economic optimization or nationalistic competition utterly irrational in the face of species-level survival. This knowledge, surfaced and made unavoidable by AJA, becomes the ultimate driver for mandated global cooperation. The math makes selfishness look stupid.
If the AI tells us the undeniable truth about physics and ecology, maybe we finally have no choice but to cooperate. But there's a technical hurdle mentioned that prevents us from easily realizing this kind of unified ethical framework. The pattern of knowledge transfer impedance. What's that?
Well, current AI models are often highly domain-specific. An AI brilliant at medical diagnosis knows nothing about climate modeling, and vice versa. The technical challenge is generalizing knowledge, and more importantly, generalizing ethical constraints across these vastly different systems and domains.
So the ethical rules don't automatically carry over.
Not easily. AGA requires the development of what the sources term interdomain knowledge transfer architectures. The specific problem is ensuring that core ethical constraints identified and validated in one domain, like the Hippocratic oath of do no harm, non-maleficence, rigorously applied in human biology and medicine, are seamlessly and automatically applied as mandatory, non-bypassable limits in, say, economic forecasting or environmental resource optimization patterns.
So you couldn't design an economic algorithm that optimizes short-term profit if doing so demonstrably violates the non-maleficence constraint on long-term human health or ecological stability.
That's exactly the idea. The ethical constraints need to propagate across domains and act as universal guardrails.
Okay, so this comprehensive roadmap for AJ implementation obviously demands an entirely new ecosystem of tools to make it work in practice. The blueprint mentions devices like dynamic monitoring wearables.
Right? Things that could collect individual physiological or environmental data, learn personalized norms over time, and provide real-time alerts for managing personalized health risks, or maybe even flagging potential ethical risks in a decision context.
And crucially, the AJA auditing platforms. These sound like the backbone of accountability.
They really are. These software solutions are designed to ensure every significant automated decision is traceable, auditable, and explainable. And we return here to the importance of that localized causal map, LCM concept we discussed earlier. That visual interface designed to spatially localize the biased features or key drivers within the data.
Because that's how you make accountability intuitive.
Exactly. It's how we make accountability visible and understandable for non-technical users, for policymakers, for the public being affected by these systems.
And accountability must involve the public directly, leading to the need for algorithmic mediation participatory design consoles. What are these?
Think of these as mandated platforms or processes designed to allow citizens and diverse stakeholders to collaboratively define the ethical boundaries, the policy implementation parameters, and crucially, the acceptable trade-offs between efficiency and equity before an AI system is deployed in the public sphere.
So it shifts AI governance away from being just an elite technical exercise.
Precisely. It aims to make it a more democratic civic responsibility. People get a say in how they are governed by algorithms.
Now, this entire systemic shift towards AJA fundamentally changes the labor market, doesn't it? Since AI excels at prediction and optimization, the source identifies a pattern of maximized human value add, dictating that human cognitive resources must pivot away from routine tasks that AI can handle.
Correct. The value shifts. Human focus must increasingly shift entirely to tasks requiring uniquely human capabilities. Complex ethical judgment, setting collective goals and communal purpose, establishing and debating legal boundaries, creative problem-solving, and critical oversight of the AI systems themselves.
Which leads to entirely new, necessary job categories. The blueprint is quite specific about these potential future roles.
Yes, it outlines several essential functions needed to make AJA work.
Okay, let's quickly run through these key new roles. First, there's the independent oversight function, algorithmic auditor certifiers.
Right. These would be the in-board specialists, perhaps certified professionals, tasked with comprehensive auditing of AI systems across all domains: law, finance, health, government services. They'd check for fairness, privacy compliance, regulatory adherence, and rigorously test for hidden proxy bias before and during deployment. They are the objective referees, ensuring the systems meet agreed-upon standards.
Then we need people to bridge the communication gap, the socio-technical mediator.
This role is absolutely crucial for meaningful civic engagement. These individuals would bridge the gap between complex algorithmic explanations, maybe using those LCM outputs we talked about, and the needs and understanding of ordinary citizens. They would facilitate that participatory design process, ensuring the public actually understands the implications of the algorithms shaping their lives.
And we still need technical experts to fix problems. The bias remediation engineer.
Yes, these are the specialists focused on the technical fixes. They would develop and implement remedies, like sophisticated debiasing algorithms, new data sampling methodologies, or synthetic data generation, specifically designed to actively counteract the historical inequality that gets encoded in foundational data sets. They are constantly fighting that legacy of proxy bias at the technical level.
And finally, there's a role designed specifically to solve that foundational crisis we started this whole deep dive with, the speed mismatch between tech and policy, the regulatory velocity analyst.
This sounds like a crucial high-impact role. These analysts would be tasked with tracking the real-time effects of AI deployment monitoring for emerging bias, tracking job displacement patterns, assessing systemic fragility risks, and using that constantly updated data to dynamically propose necessary policy adjustments and legal updates.
So they try to close the gap.
Exactly. This role actively tries to mitigate that pattern acceleration disparity, ensuring that policy response time becomes much more proportional to the speed of technological development and its real-world impacts. They keep the regulation loop running much faster.
Okay, this all synthesizes then into the core thesis of the AJA blueprint.
Yeah.
It seems AJA is ultimately not really about achieving absolute control over the AI itself, like some sci-fi trope.
No, that's not the main point.
It's about using AI, using this incredible cognitive mirror and pattern recognition engine to help us better control and optimize human governance and human behavior toward a consciously chosen goal of systemic planetary justice.
That's it precisely. The essential choice for humanity is laid bare by the insights AI can provide. If we fail to act consciously, the AI will simply efficiently recognize and amplify all our historical patterns of inequality and unsustainability, leading to a predictable, deeply unjust, and potentially catastrophic future. The ultimate pattern AI suggests is the pattern of proactive ethical alignment. We must consciously choose and articulate a clear, just purpose aligned with those inescapable existential patterns revealed by AI's analysis of reality. We started way back by discussing that fascinating concept of the optimal deviation pattern, the idea that AJA might need to mandate a measured, necessary inefficiency required for self-directed struggle and genuine human growth. The really provocative question the sources leave us with is this: what does it say about our current systems that they are already so ruthlessly optimized for maximal, yet often profoundly unjust efficiency?
They seem efficient for the few, perhaps, but often cruel or indifferent for the many. And if perfect, relentless optimization is potentially the enemy of human agency. The final thought for you, the listener, is: what immediate, calculated inefficiency might you need to deliberately introduce into your own increasingly digitally optimized life to ensure that your personal agency, your space for reflection and error and growth, isn't trampled by the relentless drive for prediction and optimization that surrounds us?
That is definitely the pattern we all must reckon with individually as well as systemically. A truly fascinating and challenging thought to close on. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
Searching for answers to unanswered questions.
This is DigitView.